Testing. Is this working? Yeah, it sounds like this is working. Wonderful. Which means I'm not tethered to the desk. So first, thank you to OMG and Bobbin for inviting me to speak today. It's an absolute honor to be able to speak to you guys about a topic that is near and dear to my heart, which is blockchain technology. Next slide, please. So where are we in 2018? I want to start by going back a couple of years. 2017, that was the year that Bitcoin became a thing globally, and blockchain became this buzzword that could open the door to millions of dollars in investment. But as we look at the last 2 years and the attention that it's brought, we still find that actually most people don't really understand what blockchain technology is. They don't understand the benefits that it can offer, and they don't understand why people like me who work in the space are so excited about the future that it presents for us. So today we're going to try and go a little bit beyond the headlines that are driving the discussion in the industry and really dig in a little bit into what blockchain is, what the benefits that it delivers for us, and look at some use cases to kind of illustrate how those benefits are actually taking place in the real world. Next slide, please. I remember exactly where I was when I went down the blockchain rabbit hole. I got sucked in hard and fast. I picked up the CoinMarketCap 100 and I started reading white papers. I was absolutely enamored with the technology. In retrospect, I probably should have stuck some money in it that time, and then I'd be rich and enamored, but I didn't. Instead, I literally spent hours and hours listening to podcasts, reading white papers, literally till my eyes were red. And when I got to the place that I felt like I was just be a little bit dangerous, like knew enough just to be a little bit dangerous, I started asking myself, how is it that I should talk about this technology? I come from a marketing background. How do I explain this to my wife? And as I was thinking about that, I was saying to myself, I was lucky. I was between roles. So I spent 6 months every single day studying blockchain. And I said, most people have jobs. They're not going to be able to spend this much time diving into this technology to try and understand it in the way that I'm trying to understand it. And so at that point, I started listening with a lot of intent to how people talked about and described this technology. At this point, I've probably listened to hundreds, or not thousands, of descriptions of what this technology is. Next slide, please. And it always starts out with what I call the dreaded question: what is blockchain? And boy, you talk about the range of answers that you can get for this. We're dealing with a relatively technical audience. You have the technical definition. Well, blockchain is a distributed ledger technology where transactions are grouped into blocks and cryptographically put together, and nodes run by miners come to agreement as to the order of those transactions, and also help prevent fraudulent transactions from getting through, yada, yada, yada. There is a place for that, but for me, when I was trying to get my little marketing mind around this, as I was going down the rabbit hole, at about distributed ledger, I would just lose it. I was like, well, people, either I'm an idiot or they're speaking pig Latin, because I don't get this. So what I try and do is I say, you know what, in reality, most people don't actually need to know how the technology works at an in-depth level. I mean, when you sent your first email, you probably weren't an expert in TCP/IP. You just sent an email. And so I try and help people understand what this technology is using layman's terms, and then more importantly, focus on what are the benefits that this technology delivers so that people go, because everyone can understand that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you my 2-minute, maybe 2.5-minute definition of what blockchain is in layman's terms. So for those of you who are highly technical, you'll probably look at this and say, I don't need to know all that. But for the rest of you, you can use this weekend at your Christmas party, and you can look really smart to your friends. So here's my definition. So everybody in here probably has a phone, either iOS or Android. by the looks, I'm thinking a lot of iOS in here. iOS is a platform that got 3 million applications that are being built on that platform. Blockchain is a platform in the same way. You can build tons of applications on top of blockchain. It just so happened that the first application built on blockchain and launched at the same time was a cryptocurrency, that one we know as Bitcoin. Why did Bitcoin, what was the reason for Bitcoin? What did it solve for? Well, that's what we call the old double spend problem, which is a jargony term, which basically means in the digital world, typically if we share something with someone else, we have identical copies. So if I send you a PDF, you and I both have identical copies of that PDF. If that were $1, conceivably you and I could both spend that $1. What blockchain enabled was for me to send you $1, you to know you had that $1, me to know you had that $1, but more importantly, for all the folks in this room, when you go to spend it, to know that you had that $1 as well. Hence the double spend problem that it solved for. Boom, I think that was less than 2.5 minutes. Everybody can use that this weekend, look really smart at your Christmas party. Next slide, please. So before we dive into where we are and some of the use cases, I just want to start with kind of how we got here, just a little bit of context as to how we got here in terms of this technology. Next slide, please. You've probably seen more than one slide like this before. You know, when I look at it, I say, okay, we basically spent 30 years or so to try and get a computer from a mainframe to sitting in your pocket every day. And then we moved into a stage where we start to see software become more and more relevant with blockchain and distributed ledger technologies, or DIDO. I like that. I might use that. I'll provide that information when I do. Has now become a thing. But I want to delve a little bit closer to some of the more recent antecedents which have led to this, this blockchain phenomenon. Next slide, please. This was a quote from Mark Andreessen back in 2011. I believe it was in the Wall Street Journal. And the point he was making when he made this comment, software is eating the world, was that so many of the products and services that we use that have traditionally been delivered through other means are now being delivered through software. They're being delivered through software, and they're adding significant value for businesses, for consumers, and for investors. Some of these projects you have probably heard of. Next slide, please. If you think about Google, they come in and they disrupt advertising, right? But they didn't own any of the traditional vehicles for delivering advertising. They didn't have a television station, they didn't own magazines, they didn't own newspapers, they didn't own classifieds. They were delivering this product through software. Amazon, obviously the same thing with books. Netflix never owned a movie theater, yet we're all watching Netflix at home. Airbnb, etc. You can go through the list. And this incredible amount of value that has been delivered is what actually has led to the need for these blockchain solutions, because what we've seen is so much of our data and information has now become super centralized by a very small number of players. You know, right now, between 70 and 80% of every additional ad dollar being spent is being captured by just 2 entities. That's a bit nuts and probably not what the original architects of the internet were looking for. Next slide, please. So now I want to dive into what some of the benefits are of blockchain technology. First one, borderless nature of blockchain technology, cryptocurrency specifically here. When I first started experimenting with the space and I was trying to understand why are people seeing value in this, I used to live in Australia. I moved here just under 3 years ago, so I still have a bank account in Australia, have bank accounts here, and whenever I would move money between my accounts, I would always move at least several $1,000s just because I knew I was going to get gouged on the fees and the cost of moving the money. So when I started experimenting with blockchain and with Bitcoin in particular, I said, okay, what would happen if I were to move $100 US from my Aussie bank account to my US bank account? This is what it looks like. I go into my Aussie account, I know that I'm getting gouged on the exchange rate by my bank, so I figure out what that is, I send that to my US account. My Aussie bank charges me a $20 Aussie wire fee. I send it to my US account. I get a $25 receiving fee from my US bank account, so I end up with about $55 in my US bank account trying to send $100. So then I said, how would that work if I used Bitcoin? So I sent money from my Aussie account to my CoinJar account, and I bought $100 worth of Bitcoin. Then I shipped that Bitcoin to my Coinbase account. Then I withdrew that to my US bank account. And voila, I had $100. And I said, I'm not the sharpest tool in the shed, but I think somebody's going to find some value in this. Next slide, please. So one of the companies that operates in this space that is one of my favorites, a woman named Elizabeth Rossiello. She's the entrepreneur who founded BitPesa. They operate in the frontier regions in Africa. And they use Bitcoin functionally as a payment rail for businesses in these frontier regions. The reason that this is so valuable is because the friction in the banking system in these regions is through the roof. Banks aren't open every day. There's only a certain amount of money you might be able to deposit or withdraw in a day. Even the days they are open, maybe they're open at 9, maybe they're open at noon, not quite sure. There's just a ton of friction. So what they do is they enable these businesses to be able to pay their suppliers, pay contractors, pay their employees by providing liquidity and using Bitcoin as a payment rail. One of the things I love about it is they actually aren't exposed to the up and down volatility for more than 10, 15 minutes. They're simply using it as a vehicle, as a means for their customers to pay their suppliers. It goes into Bitcoin, it moves to wherever that's going to go, it's pulled out in the local fiat currency, and vice versa when it comes back to them. So they're not worried about exposure of the volatility of the cryptocurrency. She used to laugh back in January. It was a great interview where she talked about concern about transaction fees. Are you worried about the high transaction fees? There are all these people on Bitcoin. And she laughed. She said, I aggregate a whole bunch of payments for a whole bunch of my customers, my businesses, my clients. And she goes, whatever the fee is nothing compared to what they're dealing with on a daily basis. So it's irrelevant to her. So she's built this business that adds real value, is meaningful, and takes advantage of this borderless nature of Bitcoin as a cryptocurrency. Next slide, please. So any well-designed blockchains are, in theory, immutable, or the data is stored in a way that makes it very difficult, if not impossible, to change that data, or extremely expensive in order to change that data. Why is this important? The way we like to talk about it at Dragonchain is we say, well, how does your business change if you can trust your data? It's a really simple question for businesses, and if you go to the next slide, this is a great example of what happens if you can trust your data. So Northern Trust is a private equity fund. They simply decided, hey, you know what? Let's put all of our transactions on the blockchain, and then let's enable our accountants, PwC, to run a node and be able to access that information in real time. So now all of a sudden, instead of PwC showing up at their offices, rifling through papers and digital documents, trying to figure out what transactions took place, they're able to see those transactions in real time. They're able to be cryptographically secured and know that those transactions have actually happened, and there's only one record of the truth. So the efficiencies that you can see offered through something like this are significant. And it's not just in fund management. You can go through any range of use cases, supply chain, where you have lots of different people who, or different entities that have to trust each other, but they want to share some data, don't want to share other data, but need a single record of the truth. The efficiencies that can be offered there are quite significant.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
You use here to launch blockchain audits. Don't you mean DLT audits?
So in this case, I believe they were actually using a blockchain protocol that they created themselves, not just a distributed ledger.
So it's Northern Trust, PwC is running on IBM blockchain platform.
Hyperledger.
Right, Hyperledger with the security and encryption engines that we added to it, as well as encrypted high-performance transaction channels that are to meet the audit requirements of both the EU and the US and OCC.
Right, but I don't believe that qualifies quote unquote as blockchain. I think
So,
that,
Lars, can I stop you there? Sorry. Can we not discuss terminology, because as we're here to learn, we'll find that there's
Okay.
a lot of different ways that a lot of different terms are used. If something's unclear, please feel free to jump in and ask the speaker to clarify.
sorry.
But we can have a discussion about the meaning of the words this afternoon in the Finance Domain Task Force, and I'll shut it down there as well. But please carry on.
Wonderful. Next slide, please. Censorship resistance. This is actually one of my favorite benefits of this technology in terms of there are so many places around the world where the ability or inability of people to be able to share data and information effectively requires new technology that allows for this censorship resistance. So, in short, what does censorship resistance mean? I always tell people it means you can't walk into Bitcoin Inc., turn off the lights, and say, hey, we're shutting you down. Because Bitcoin exists on tens of thousands of computers around the world, you have to shut down all those computers if you're going to shut it down. But there's a great example of where this comes into play. You could go to the next slide. This is one of my favorite examples. So the Me Too movement hit China. And when it hit China, China didn't particularly like it. There was a case at Peking University, which is kind of like the Harvard of China, where a young lady in the 90s who had claimed that she was assaulted by her professors and eventually committed suicide. There was a student there recently who started investigating that. And she made inquiries to the university about that, and the university basically expelled her. So she then, not to be discouraged, wrote an open letter to the university asking, why am I being expelled? Why are you hiding information on this? And put that out. And then China does what China does best. They put the censors to work. And they started scraping all traces of it from the internet. They tried all kinds of stuff. They tried posting it upside down, doing it reflective. The censors all were able to remove it. So somebody very smart decided, you know what? I'm going to post this letter to the Ethereum blockchain. So they created a transaction on the Ethereum blockchain and printed the letter in the metadata. Voila. Censors couldn't do anything about that. So that's one of my favorite examples of a real live, actual use case where that censorship resistance that blockchains offer adds real value and real meaning. Next slide, please. One of the things that's interesting, particularly about some of the common beliefs around any new technology, but Bitcoin in particular, was that, of course, it's for criminals. But in reality, the transparency of blockchain technology is actually a real boon benefit, not just for users, but also for law enforcement. So if you can go to the next slide. I've listened to a number of interviews with several FBI agents who were early in terms of trying to understand the technology and figure out how it was being used by criminals. And one of the things that they quickly came to understand was that even though the technology is pseudonymous, everyone has an address, but it's not necessarily tied to your name, they loved it when criminals would try and use Bitcoin, because they would say, you know what, all we have to do is we can triangulate the transactions that are coming from particular addresses. We can look at the IP addresses that are accessing the addresses for Bitcoin. And you didn't have to be super sharp to be able to figure out who was behind these addresses. So anytime that they see criminals say, yes, we're going to use Bitcoin in order to do my illicit things, they laugh and they say, great, we love it. Thanks for that. It's much easier than tracking cash. Next slide. So we have, you can click through that, there's 4 of them. So we have remittances, you can click through all 4. Remittances, fund management, human rights, and law enforcement. 4 very vastly different areas that are taking advantage of different elements and different benefits that blockchain technology enables. Next slide. So right now we know the news is all about things like the crypto winter, which yesterday someone dubbed as the nuclear winter right now. Next one. We hear a lot about the SEC and their enforcement actions, and we hear a lot about, next one please, ICO scams. And while those things are driving the top line news and headlines, when you're thinking about blockchain, I want you to think about him running up here to fix the projector.
Distributed mouse.
What I want you to think about is actually what's happening beneath the fold. Things like the market screaming out for solutions to real world problems. We've all been hearing about, the lettuce and the like. Well, we got Walmart saying producers have to get on blockchain. Next slide, please. You've got venture investment, traditional venture investment, equity-based investments still going through the roof for blockchain-related companies. And next one, please. And then you've got major players investing significant dollars in this space, whether it's Amazon, our friends at Microsoft, IBM, and others. These are things that are, as we look at our business and our prospects in 2019 and beyond, these are the things that we're paying attention to, not the other ones that tend to drive the top line headlines. And so I encourage you to flip it over, look at what's happening beneath the fold, because that's where the real exciting stuff is taking place and blockchain is happening. So with that, I thank you guys, and I'll open it up for questions if you have any questions.